sponsored by Ram Trucks, built to serve.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to First Things First. I'm Jenna Wolf alongside Nick Wright, Kevin Wildes. We got Brian Westbrook with us on this Monday morning. Coming up, so Kevin Durant is out. Does that now lock up the East for the Milwaukee Bucks? We'll discuss. Guess what teammates are saying about Tom Brady? And if you can guess, what you won't guess is what James Harden looks like these days. He is a very changed man. But we begin this morning's program with more fallout in reaction to nationwide protests about social injustices. On Thursday, a group of high-profile NFL players, including Michael Thomas, Patrick Mahomes, OBJ, Ezekiel Elliott, and Deshaun Watson, released a video urging the NFL to condemn racism and admit wrongdoing and silencing them from peacefully protesting. On Friday, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell responded with this.
It has been a difficult time for our country, in particular, Black people in our country. First, my condolences to the families of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and all the families who have endured police brutality. We, the National Football League, condemn racism and the systematic oppression of Black people. We, the National Football League, admit we were wrong for not listening to NFL players earlier and encourage all to speak out and peacefully protest. We, the National Football League, believe Black lives matter. I personally protest with you and want to be part of the much-needed change in this country. Without Black players, there would be no National Football League. And the protests around the country are emblematic of the centuries of silence, inequality, and oppression of Black players, coaches, fans, and staff. We are listening. I am listening. And I will be reaching out to players who have raised their voices and others on how we can improve and go forward for a better and more united NFL family.
Nick, let's start with you. What was your reaction to Roger Goodell's comments?
My reaction to Roger Goodell's comments is I am so incredibly grateful and so incredibly thankful to the hundreds of thousands of my fellow Americans who over the last week and a half have taken to the streets, because while there is still work to be done, while the job is not even close to finished, the Overton window on this has shifted, and you saw it right there. What was once, whenever we talked about police brutality, we immediately had to talk about the flag or patriotism or the soldiers. Whenever someone tried to say Black Lives Matter, an obvious statement of fact, they were met with the nonsense retort of all lives matter, or you're actually the racist, or you're the one that's making it about color, as opposed to recognizing what the movement actually is about. And when you see Roger Goodell stare down into the barrel of the camera and say, Black Lives Matter, when you see Roger Goodell stare down into the barrel of the camera and say the NFL was wrong, I never expected that to happen. And it does not happen without the folks in the streets over the last week and a half. So I want to give Goodell immense credit here. Now, I understand folks are going to say it's not enough. And maybe it isn't. And Cap is still blackballed, and that will always be a stain on the NFL's legacy and the NFL's record on this. But right now, where we are today, we are closer to affecting positive actual change than we were 2 weeks ago. And the discussion is more honest than it ever has been. And Roger Goodell surprised me by giving that statement and releasing it Friday night. I also want to quickly give credit to Drew Brees, because I was very critical of Drew on Thursday. Drew then, while we were on the air, released an apology that I was skeptical of. Since then, Drew has released a first-person video that seems sincere. His wife has released a statement, and Drew addressed an Instagram to the current president of the United States, letting him know that he and Drew had been wrong on this and not issuing a challenge, but not backing down from the inevitable challenge that the president was going to issue and did issue last night. So Drew and Roger Goodell in this regard stepped up in ways I didn't expect them to. And lastly, Wilds, the last point Roger Goodell makes is such an important one when he says the NFL would not exist without its black players. And that's why I always laugh when folks yell the stick to sports stuff when we're talking about this. You cannot talk about the NFL or the NBA without talking about race. If you are going to treat the athletes like they're two-dimensional beings instead of three-dimensional people, then we might as well just run those NBA 2K and Madden simulations and have that be our sports. But Wilds, we know them as people, we follow their Instagrams, we talk about who they date, and that means in the NFL and the NBA, we must be able to talk about race. And we must be able to talk about what matters to our athletes on a personal and societal level. And so I was very pleasantly surprised by how quickly over the last 10 days this conversation has moved after seemingly being stuck in the mud for the better part of 4 years, Wilds.
I think that's very well said, Nick. When you talk about the protest, the most optimistic thing that I've seen, or one of the most optimistic things, is when Steven Jackson had George Floyd's daughter on his shoulder and says, "Daddy changed the world." And you look around from like my hometown, there's 150,000 people in Berlin, Madrid, and Rome, and Sydney, and Japan. It's like the whole world feels like it's changing. And Brian, I know we talk about, teamwork all the time on this show and the value of a team, but to see the team come together in the players' video, starting with Michael Thomas, who a NFL employee reached out to him, and Michael Thomas quickly got this group, and to see the power of the players and the unity, and to see Patrick Mahomes look down at the camera and say, "I am Tamir Rice," that feels like a lightning bolt of power. And I want to say, Brian, this feels like a new chapter. I don't want to be, naively optimistic, but to me it felt like when the history of the NFL is written, the statement that we've had from Goodell in this last week will start a new chapter, not only for the NFL, but maybe for the entire sports world.
Kevin, I think you're absolutely right when we talk about the sports world and our world in general, not just the sports world, but our world in general. I hope that we're turning over a new leaf for our entire universe, our entire world. But my reaction to all of these things that have happened over the past week is that look how powerful we are when we work together. I mean, we saw current players, we saw former players, we saw entertainers, actors and actresses, rappers, singers, everyone on the front lines out there protesting over the last week and a half. They were saying that enough is enough. We want change right now. Of course, we saw the video of the NFL players, I'm talking about not just guys that sit on the bench. These are big-time players, Patrick Mahomes, Mike Thomas, Zeke, Odell Beckham Jr. A lot of the players that we all love are stepping up to the plate and saying that we are no longer going to stand quiet and allow racial injustice and police brutality to happen and not protest against it. And I think to your earlier point, Nick, when you have the commissioner of the most powerful league in the world say that we made a mistake and we didn't listen to the players and that Black Lives Matter, that's power. And that's us working together to gain that power and that control and try to make change. I have to be honest with you guys. In the Black community, there's always been a kind of undertone that we need to work together better, and that if we work together better, we'll have a much better community. And while that still is true, I saw this past weekend and really over the course of the last week, people that don't look like me protesting just as hard as people that look like me. And to me, there was a value in that. There was change in that, and that's why it feels so different. I just want to go back into what Roger Goodell said 3 or 4 years ago when this all was happening. He said, listen, if you guys want to protest, do it in the tunnel. If you're out in the field, you need to stand up and you need to salute the flag. And by saying that, he also said that we're going to quiet Colin Kaepernick, and it made it okay for the country to ignore and not listen to Colin Kaepernick, because that's how powerful and strong the NFL machine is and the institution of the NFL. But by Roger Goodell coming out and saying that Black Lives Matter, that they were wrong, hopefully the people that listen, the machine of the NFL, that will change them as well. Here's a couple of action items that I think are very, very important. Roger Goodell said Black Lives Matter, that we're going to listen to the players, and that we're going to do all things that are going to help the players. Well, here's a couple of things that I think will help the players right away. We need more minority head coaches. At this point, out of the 32 teams, we only have 4 minority head coaches. At this point, we have no African American owners. We need more representation as far as African Americans in the ownership group. We need more representation in the head coach and the coordinator ranks as well. I'm talking about offensive and defensive coordinator, and also in the pipeline of making that are a lot. Many of these players are coming from. And if we can work together like we work together to address these protests and all these different things, then we will actually see the change that we all are looking for.
Such great words, and it's so true what Brian said, the power of what could happen when everyone works together. And it feels like we finally, for the first time, have the league and the players and maybe even the fans coming together seemingly on the same page, working in one direction. So, Nick, I guess I would ask you, do you feel like this is a turning point? These sentiments, this messaging, these voices, the videos that are put out, do you think that we're finally at a point where all of this will result in league-wide change?
Well, I think more important than league-wide change, I think we saw over the weekend, it's resulting in actual actionable change. You see whether it's in Minneapolis or New York City, you see some of the reforms in regards, because again, it's important that we use the actual